The memory of Celestia, Twilight murmured to herself. The light died down as she stood once more in the dark room, barely illuminated by her pendant. The bloody body of the dead soldier lay before her body shuddering slightly, taking a deep breath as she calmed her aching senses. I can't even pretend to know how she must have felt. Twilight closed her eyes, the image of Celestia's face still fresh in her mind. To be forced to sacrifice her own people, just so that others might live. The black sword gripped within her magic floated upwards, and she looked at the blade, the reflection of herself just barely within view from the shining edge. So that she could live. It was a bitter pill to swallow. Her teacher, her mentor, had agreed that others should die so that she could live. It wasn't the kind of image Twilight would have pictured of her teacher. Celestia, the ruler of Equestria, cared deeply for her subjects. Twilight could only picture Celestia ever giving herself up so that her people might live. But the memory laid here told her the opposite. Celestia would sacrifice her people so that she might live. There must have been some grander purpose. Twilight's words were so quiet, they didn't even have the chance to echo back to her. A reason that she had to live. After all, Acnologia still lived. If she died, who would stand to face him? Though she had lost, she still had to face him, to stop him from ruling the land. They were the only words that convinced Twilight to accept what she'd seen. That her teacher was not a selfish monster willing to sacrifice her people, but a benevolent ruler who knew what had to be done. The sound of stone hitting the floor struck her ears, and she quickly looked away from her sword. On the ground next to the dead soldier was a tile. Etched into its surface was the same carving she had seen on the door, a dragon facing down a soldier. I see. I need to get 4 of these to open the door. The tile began to float and quickly disappeared, joining Twilight's magical reservoir. She turned around and opened the grinding stone door once more, entering the circular room that contained 5 doors. She had completed the first, and one required 4 tiles in order to open. Her mind quickly told her that the other 3 doors also held memories, much the same as this one had. She quickly swallowed any bubbling fear that had appeared in her throat, and walked up to the door next to the one she had just entered. On its surface was a picture of a pony reading a book, with Celestia looming overhead, was carved into the door. A few possible thoughts ran through Twilight's head, but there was only one way to know if they were correct. Raising her hoof, she pressed against the door and opened it slowly, grinding against the floor once more. The first thing that hit her ears was the familiar sound of paper being crumpled, as though it were being eaten. The light of her pendant followed next, falling upon the back of a creature she had seen in Stalingrad Library. Her sword rose before her as the creature seemed to stop, noticing her presence. She wouldn't give it time to attack. Its blank, round head turned to face her as the swift black blade soared through the air. In an instant, the sword was embedded deep within the creature's neck. The devourer of books let out a sickening howl of pain before it was silenced by Twilight, splitting its neck in half. The bulbous body fell to the ground, blood oozing from the large wound in its neck, life slipping away. She had gotten quite good at killing. The actions were coming by instinct now. There was a monster before her. It wanted to take her life. She couldn't afford to get hurt any more than she already had, so she had to end it quickly. Aim for the vital points, the head, the neck, the heart, the brain. A decisive blow to any of them would end the battle quickly and in her favor. For a moment, she wondered if perhaps this is what it felt like to be a soldier. Just as the thoughts came to a head, the familiar light appeared from the body before her, floating up to the center of the room. It quickly filled the room once again, her vision becoming trapped into her mentor's memory. The young mare was thrust to the ground. A hoof slammed down on her back, causing her to yelp out in pain as she struggled to breathe. She struggled against the hoof until it dug into her back, causing her to wince. She looked up slowly, seeing the looming figure of Princess Celestia sitting on her throne. The cold, cruel eyes of a vicious leader looked down upon her. "Golden Seal," the commanding voice of the princess boomed forth. "Thou art henceforth charged with the illegal acquisition of information and treason to the throne. How dost thou plead?" Not guilty! The yellow mare cried out quickly, only to have her breath stolen by the hoof on her back. I'm loyal to the crown, my princess. I would never betray. Another stomp of the hoof silenced her. Celestia glared down at the mare, her horn lighting up as several books were drawn forth before her. Thou were caught not only in possession of these tomes, but red-hoofed in the middle of reading them. These tomes contain vital secrets of the equestrian kingdom, and thou were just appraising them as if thou owned them. Celestia's hoof slammed down on her chair as she glared at the mare. And thou hast the nerve to say thou is not guilty? Your Highness. The mare coughed, a trickle of blood forming at the edge of her mouth. It's true what you say. I began to read one, but I'm no traitor. Equestria is my home. I bear no ill will towards the kingdom or the throne. I just wanted to know more, so that I might help the kingdom further. We know what thou speaketh lies. Celestia boomed, causing the whole court to wince in fright. Thou cometh from the lands of Lord Gemstone, a contemptible stallion who has been charged with attempting to overthrow our kingdom. Thou art in league with such a villainous royal. No! Golden cried out, her eyes widening in fear. I would never betray your majesty. I swear it on my life. Then thy life is what we shall have. Celestia slammed her foot down on the ground once again. Take this peasant away. She shalt know what it means to betray the crown. Golden's body trembled with fear, her eyes watering as the guards picked her up, dragging her away, thrashing. No, princess, please! I would never betray you! I never meant for this to happen! Please listen! The doors to Celestia's throne slammed shut as the mare disappeared behind them. There was a lingering silence left in the room once after her departure. A feeling in the air that would not dissipate, yet no one would dare speak a word of it. I will return to my chambers now. Celestia stood up from her throne. Do not disturb me unless it is of grave importance. The guards of her throne quickly saluted her as she walked out of the throne room, heading for her chambers. Thou hast grown colder since thy battle. A voice cut through the air, causing Celestia to stop. There was only one pony who would dare speak to her in such a manner. We cannot dare to imagine what it is that thou witnessed, but thou returned changed. Our battles do not concern that of thou, little sister. Celestia almost growled, not wanting to turn to face her sister. Luna stepped out from the shadows, standing behind Celestia, her gaze unchanged. Our kingdom is changing, not with the ideas of hope in mind. Little though there is that we can do it to stop it, for thou arrest the one who controls the royals. Our crowns have little power these days. Thou need not lecture us. We've seen our kingdom with thy own eyes. We will save it. Then let us do it together, sister. For no reason should our powers be divided. Luna stepped closer to Celestia, Celestia's own aggravation growing with Luna's words. We recognize that the crown has more power in thy hooves, but thou should know that such a matter won't last if thou doesn't want it to. Tell our court, tell our people, tell them that we shall work together. Under our name of the crown, we— Thy crown is nothing but a lie! Celestia bellowed, turning her head to glare at her sister. Luna stepped back in horror, unable to believe her ears. Celestia glared at her sister, malice coming from her veins. What hast thou done to help thy kingdom? All thou hast done is stand by and let others do thy work. Thoughts of weakness and doubt fill thy mind. If our kingdom was left to thou, there would no longer be a kingdom to rule. Luna was appalled, taking another step back as her head lowered upon hearing her sister's backlash. Celestia grit her teeth, glaring at the younger Alicorn for a moment longer before realization struck her. She turned her head away and tried to calm down, knowing she was speaking out in anger instead of logic. Thy words cut deep, like a dagger. Luna growled in return. We will do our best to save our kingdom. Thou knowest nothing. Luna turned and fled the hallway, leaving Celestia standing there alone, left to contemplate her thoughts. The Alicorn stood, alone, unmoving, for several moments, letting the stress and weight of her position and power sink in further. Then she stepped forward, heading back to her room. Twilight took a step back, recovering from the effects the memory had on her. The light of the vision faded and left her in the room once more with the bleeding body of the creature that ate books. She shook her head, trying to wrap her mind around what had just happened. Celestia sent that poor mare to her death. Twilight shook her head again, the thoughts jumbling back together to try and form a picture she didn't want them to form. All she did was read a book. She even said she was loyal to the crown. Twilight rubbed her head, trying to stop a headache from forming. Celestia must have had a good reason, right? She even said so, but... She bit her bottom lip, remembering how the princess had yelled at her younger sister, how she had declared that Luna's crown was basically worthless. The clacking sound of a tile hitting the ground distracted her for a moment, her eyes quickly noticing that one, having landed just before her. It bore the same inscription as the door, a pony reading a book with Celestia bearing down on them. I shouldn't think too hard about this for now. Twilight swallowed, quickly grabbing the tile and having it vanish into her reservoir. I'm so close to seeing Celestia. I just know it. I can ask her anything I want once I'm out of here. I just have to get out of here first. Twilight didn't waste any time getting out of the room, just wanting to distance herself from the memory. Princess Celestia was like a second mother to her, a source of wisdom and guidance, a beacon of light in a world that might not always be at its brightest. To break her down into something akin to a despot, it was something Twilight was willing to accept. Celestia had never been the type to destroy the lives of other ponies just because it favored her, or to wrongly accuse a pony of a misdeed. Nor has she sent anyone to their death within the last 400 years. She just wasn't that type of ruler. But maybe she was once. Twilight stopped before the next door, just left of the large double door. Etched into stone were the two princesses, facing each other, but away from each other. Luna's eyes were drawn down into a glare, while Celestia's were closed, hinting at a despair that refused to show on her face. Over their heads was the silhouette of a small alicorn, whose figure appeared to be ascending to the heavens. I suppose the only way to find out is to see more of her memories. Twilight gulped again, pressing her hoof to the stone door. The monsters she had faced were one thing. Losing her friends one by one was another. But to be forced to believe that her mentor was not always the wise, loving, gracious ruler that she had always been was the most bitter pill of all to swallow. The stone pushed open, grinding against the floor to reveal the small square contents of the room. In the center stood yet another familiar monster, a shabby cloak covering its body, with a blade as its legs. Its back was turned to her, it only seeming to notice her entrance once the light had hit it. It quickly turned, revealing the theater mask that covered its face. It let out a screech, quickly turning its body to face the intruding mare. The last time Twilight had fought this creature, she barely had a dagger and some books to defend herself with. But she was ready now. The black sword gleamed in the light, and her pendant, and her instincts had been honed. The creature would not last this time. It raised its sharp forelegs and swung them down, intent on ending this in a single blow. But its aim was imprecise. Her eyes naturally saw through the movements. Her body jumped to the side and sharpened edges, digging into the stone floor where she had been standing. Without letting the creature retaliate, her sword swung downward upon its flesh, slicing straight through the connecting joints of its limbs. The creature let out a horrifying wail as its body crashed to the stone floor under its own weight. It writhed, trying to get itself upright on its missing front legs. Twilight's hoof came down hard on where its shoulder should be, pinning it to the floor. The theater mask looked up, just as the point of her blade was slamming down into the center of the creature's forehead. The blade buried itself halfway into the monstrous skull before it finally stopped thrashing. Twilight panted softly, waiting a few seconds to ensure it had stopped moving before withdrawing the blade from its forehead. She turned her head to stare at the blade, seeing the blood slowly sliding down the length of it. She flicked the sword carefully, freeing it of as much blood as she could, as she stared at the body in the room. It took only a few seconds before the familiar orb of light popped up once more. Twilight swallowed a little, bracing herself for whatever she might see next. She didn't know if she was ready to see more of her beloved teacher in this way, but she had a feeling that she wasn't going to get a choice in the matter. The bedroom doors slammed open. light infiltrating the dark chamber. The figure of a darkened alicorn stood there, anger visible through the darkness. "Thou shalt explain thyself now, dear sister!" Luna's voice bellowed through the room, causing the laying figure to stir. Celestia's weary head turning, facing her sister who had been so rudely barged into her room. Even within the dark room, it was possible to see the darkened streaks under her eyes, signs she had been crying for some time. "We ordered thou to leave us for the day," Celestia growled, not wanting to deal with her sister now. "Thou hast got what thou wanted, power to the court. Thy crown shines there. Why hast thou intruded on us despite our order? Thy mouth is full of tarnished bile. Thou knows the court thinks us a jester." Luna slammed her hoof down on the ground, growing right back at her sister. "The court has become a mockery of its once irrefutable reputation, merely begging and grasping for what their mighty ruler Celestia might grace their presence once more. They care not for our interventions or ideas. Thou hast brainwashed them into your ideals, and your ideals alone. They shall not take my crown with the authority it should, unless thou art there to ensure its power. And thou knowest this." Luna shook her head, gritting her teeth, trying to control her anger before glaring at her sister. "So why hast thou set up this mockery?" "There has been no mockery towards thee, sister." Celestia bit back, bringing a hoof up to rub her face for a moment to try and regain some of her composure. "We needed this day off. We needed that thou wouldst be happy controlling the court for a day." "A shallow thought indeed. What hast thou been so pent up in thy room that thou cannot come to the royal court? If thou truly didst care for us, you'd be there to ensure we were not made into a jester." Celestia was silent for a moment, her eyes gleaming before looking away from her sister. She didn't say a word for several moments, not helping Luna's anger grow. "Well, answer us!" Luna slammed her hoof against the ground again, this time causing the bedchamber to shake ever so slightly. Celestia could feel it through the layers of her quilted pillows, and knew how serious her sister was. There was no escaping this unscathed. The only thing she could do was tell the truth. "Luna." Celestia's voice finally wavered, closing her eyes to take a deep breath before finally turning to face her sister. "We were with child." Luna's head kicked back in disbelief, unable to process her sister's words. "With child? What dost thou mean? Thou hast not shown the signs, nor hast thou had the time. How could thou be with child?" "Sister, thou hast not heard me." Celestia shook her head slowly, closing her eyes solemnly. "We were with child until the sun rose over the mountainside." "But thou hast no child. What thou says makes little sense." Luna shook her head, trying to piece together what her sister was saying. "Where is this child thou speaks of, if thou no longer has him?" Celestia turned away from her sister, anger starting to swell inside of her. "Must thou make us reveal our pain already? We were with child, our mood was changed as such, but our child no longer lives. At first breath of life, he was denied the chance to see our world under its magnificent light, to know the pleasures of pain, to know of love and deceit. Thus was our child robbed of these joys before he even began to see life within me." Luna stood unspeaking, unable to believe what she was hearing. Her sister had been carrying a life within her, but had told no one. And then as quickly as it had arrived, it had vanished from this world. But as the shock began to wear off, several questions began to enter her mind. "But, sister, thou hast never mentioned a stallion thou had liked. A suitor of sorts that thou chose has not been shown, nor hast thou made any arrangements for a wedding, or to make a family." Luna shook her head and stamped her hoof. "Sister, when didst thou have time to bear a child?" Celestia didn't respond. She turned to face Luna, quietly staring at the younger sister. She did not speak a word. Her tired eyes were all that needed to be seen. The pieces connected in Luna's mind, and realization slowly began to dawn on her. The hair on the back of her neck began to stand on end, her muscles tensing as her body reacted to the thoughts that her mind was fighting. No. The younger sister's words came out quiet, but the hesitation and fear apparent within it. Luna. Celestia began, but was cut off before she could say more. No, 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 thou did not. Thou would not stoop to such a heinous act. Luna's hoof slammed against the ground again, her body beginning to shake as her teeth grit. Her brow began to furrow in anger, glaring daggers at the elder unicorn. Thou did not do what our mind has conceived. Thou would not betray us like that. Luna, please. Luna's eye twitched, her hooves stomping the floor again, her head lowering, and her teeth were grinding in her mouth. Her hair twitched violently, surging with magical energy as the betrayal hit her. Thou knew we had taken a liking to that stallion. Her hoof slammed hard, rocking the bedroom once more, this time leaving cracks upon the floor. But thou did this anyway? Thou took not only our crown and our power, but our love as well? Her voice began to boom, echoing through the halls. Sister, please listen, Celestia begged, trying to stand. It's not what thou thinks. Oh, we can see it clearly, sister. Luna's head rose sharply, her eyes glaring death at Celestia. The normal cool eyes of Luna were glowing over, shining a radiant blue that overlooked her sight. Betrayal! Thou hast done nothing but betray us, but no more. No more will we stand for this. Luna's mane began to rage upward, magic filling the ceilings of the castle. Celestia's eyes widened and realization began to strike her. If thou will be a tyrant, then we shall be the ones to stop you, to bring you down. No more will your son plague the lands or our lives. You have seen the last of your days, dearest sister. The next time we meet, it shall be your end. Turning around, Luna walked away, disgusted at the mere sight of her sister. Luna, wait, please! Celestia cried out, standing and trying to follow after her sister. But the doors of her bedchamber lit up with a darkened magical aura and slammed shut before her face. Celestia stared in shock at them, realization slowly dawning of what had just happened. She had turned her sister into her enemy. The only family she had left in this world was now someone she had to oppose, to fight. Her body shook, tears flowing down her cheeks once more. Her head rose up, and a wailing cry echoed throughout her room. A cold chill ran down Twilight's back as the memory faded away. She stepped back as if trying to flee from the memory, only for her backside to run into the stone door that kept her inside the room. Her sword fell to the ground, her magic losing focus for the moment as her mind reeled from the information. Her mentor was going to be a mother once, but she never went full term. The father was Merlin, a stallion that Luna had desired, but Celestia betrayed her sister, knowing full well that Luna had feelings for him, and was bearing his child anyway. Celestia, what were you thinking? Twilight's voice quivered as she spoke out loud, trying to keep herself together. She knew Celestia could make mistakes. She knew she wasn't perfect. She always came out right in the end, though. She made the right decisions. Right? This happened over 1,000 years ago. She shook her head, trying to calm her thoughts. She's learned a lot since then. She's become a benevolent ruler. She doesn't lie or cheat or betray, and she never meant for that back then either. It just happened that way. Twilight swallowed hard, mustering her courage to steady her feet once again. I have faith in her. Faith that she truly is a wonderful teacher I always knew her to be. She turned her eyes to the center of the room as the tile fell into place once more, the gentle clacking letting her know it existed. Her eyes quickly looked over the cover, seeing the dual alicorns with the smaller one in the sky. She hadn't known what it meant at first, and now she couldn't help but wish she hadn't. The tile was quickly placed with the others, and her sword once again within the grasp of her magic. There was one last door she needed to check out, and likely one more memory she needed to witness. The large doors with Celestia on them had enough space for 4 of the tiles, and she knew it would not open without all 4. It didn't take her long to get to the final door, less than 10 paces even. She stared at the carvings in stone. Several unicorns were depicted, several wearing crowns to show their royalty. A few thoughts ran through her head about the carvings could mean. So far each door had been directly related to the memory of Celestia's, and this one was no doubt the same way. But nothing she could think of felt like it fit the picture the door portrayed. It seemed there was only one way she was going to figure it all out. She raised her hoof and pushed against the door, hearing the familiar grinding of stone as it opened. She raided her sword as soon as the door opened, knowing another phone was waiting for her inside the room. Her light fell upon the sickly flesh of the creature inside, the squirming beast coming into view. It was the largest one she had seen, long and slimy, much the same as the leech. It let out a gurgling groan as it turned towards her, no eyes visible on its head, only the gaping mouth filled with rows of teeth. The last time she'd seen this creature, it had been devouring leftover remains of ponies, but now she was the only one there for it to devour. Its mouth opened, letting out another guttural cry, its hefty body slithering towards Twilight with the intent to kill. This time there was no obvious head or neck for her to slash, nowhere for her to know for certain what needed to breathe or think. She would just have to cut it, make it bleed to death. As the creature lumbered towards her, Twilight quickly moved to her left, letting the blunt of the creature land right where she had been standing. She raised her sword and swung it down, slicing into a good chunk of its flesh. It retaliated with a guttural cry, whipping its fleshy tail back and forth, its body lumbering towards the unicorn once more, ready to lash out. Twilight grit her teeth and concentrated her magic, ramming the blade straight through the body of the leech. It let out a cry and slammed its head down in her direction, Twilight just barely managing to jump out of the way in time. She flicked her head back, sending the sword carving across the leech's body. It let out another cry, blood quickly spilling from the large gash before opening down the side of its body. Its mouth, full of razor-sharp teeth, tried to reach forth and grab hold of the purple pony before it. The black sword pulled out of the leech's body and pierced through the side of the leech's mouth. It was mere inches from Twilight, writhing in pain, narrowly having caught the pony within its massive jaw. It raised its head up, gurgling the air in pain. With a snap of her magic, the sword cut through the leech's mouth again, splitting it in half. With a final pained gurgle, it smashed to the ground, and the writhing stopped. Blood poured freely from its open wounds, life escaping the leech. Twilight panted, knowing she narrowly dodged having a limb removed. She flicked the blade in the air, removing the blood that stained its black edges so that it was clean once more. The strength of the blade surpassed any blade she had ever seen in her life. Despite the multiple uses and the constant staining, it remained sharp, slick, and ready to slice into its foe at a moment's notice. For a moment she had to wonder, what could this blade possibly be made of? She shook her head and looked back towards the center of the room, the ball of light containing Celestia's memories appearing once more. She swallowed hard, unsure of what she was going to see this time, but she had to brace for whatever it was. "So it's true, then?" Celestia asked, pacing the confines of her bedchamber. "I'm afraid so, Your Highness. Half of thy royal court seems to have just decided this was for the best." A rather portly white unicorn spoke, his dark blue mane tied back. He pulled the monocle off his face and cleaned it with a cloth from his suit pocket before placing it back on his face. "I must say that you must have been waiting for this opportunity. The royal court has always been a bit, shall we say, contemptible, while you weren't around." Celestia paused her pacing to think over his words. She shook her head lightly, before returning to her pacing. Bags had started to form under her eyes, a clear sign of stress and exhaustion. She had barely been able to sleep since Luna stormed out of her bedroom that night, and since then she had been amassing a following, convincing the people that she was the rightful ruler, and even convincing some of the royal court to follow her command. For someone who cried about having no power under the crown, she was certainly demonstrating that she had a lot of it. In fact, I wouldn't doubt if there were still supporters of Luna still within the royal court, playing spy for thy very enemy. The royal chuckled to himself, as if the idea was somehow amusing. Celestia stopped her pacing once again, glaring at the empty space before her. "Thou say such brash words, with nary a hint of dismay. Tell us, dost thou believe thy words to be true?" "Oh, I hardly think them to be false at all. I have seen the way they shift their eyes, waiting for thou to be at your weakest. I dare say, if they weren't after the power of thy crown them for themselves." The royal unicorn snorted as he suppressed a chuckle. "I would not deal with them if I were in your shoes." "Pray tell, Sir Noble, what wouldst thou do if thou had our power?" Celestia closed her eyes, concentrating on her words and them alone. "Well, I'd certainly try to find the villainous scoundrels and put them to death." He chuckled at the thought of it, brushing a hoof against his chin. "Such underhanded methods of trying to attain the crown's power is straightforward treason. I cannot think of no better punishment than a swift and justified end." "So, thou thinkst we should kill the members of our court that would have our head?" Celestia's voice held no emotion, a flat resonance of sound that was unlike the monarch. "But of course, let us find those who stray from the crown and show thy people that thy crown truly is the strongest. No other shall be able to reclaim it." The royal let out another laugh, almost as if enjoying the very thought of the criminals that would get their dues. Celestia was silent, thinking over the words of the royal member sitting in her chambers. Her mind thought over everything that was happening and about his words. Slow realization dawned upon her, and she turned to face him. "Thou speakest the truth. Our people of our court wish for the power of our crown. Though we have survived treasonous plots, attempts on our life, and changes to the land, what we face now requires a more drastic action." She spoke calmly, no longer pacing, but slowly walking towards the noble. "I'm glad thou hast seen reason. Shall we call the guards and undertake the search for the treasonous gah?" The portly pony's words were cut off suddenly, yellow magic gripping tightly around his neck and lifting him into the air. "We shall put to death the ponies that wish to control the power of our crown, starting with thou." Celestia glared death at the struggling unicorn before her. He squirmed and fought the grip of her magic, gasping for air as the grip seemed to tighten. Your Highness!" The portly unicorn wheezed, his face glowing bluer as he struggled. "I would never—" "Thou hast been trying to play us for a fool for some time now, using thy people, lying to our face, living in luxury while thy belly grows. Thy bid for the crown did not go unnoticed, and so thou shalt be the first to taste our fury." A loud snap echoed through Celestia's room, as the once royal pony's head was now twisted the wrong direction. With a loud thud, the body hit the floor, released from Celestia's magic. Her cold eyes stared at the body, unwavered in the fact that for the first time she had killed a pony with her own two hooves. It was always others that carried out her orders of death, but now she had blood on her hooves, the same as her soldiers. She turned towards her chamber door and walked towards them, her magic flinging them open. "Luna is building an army, looking for weakness in our kingdom. But if it's a war she is after, then a war she shall get." The bedroom door chambers slammed shut behind her, leaving the body of her first victim within. Twilight shuddered as the world returned to her once more, thankful the memory was finally over. Her mentor, her second mother, the one pony she looked up to more than anyone else in the world, had done such a horrible thing. Twilight understood the reason why she had done it. The memories made it clear, but she thought she had actually gone through with it. Her stomach didn't agree with her. Her legs felt weak, even though she knew she needed to be strong. She hadn't escaped from this world yet, only learned its truth. Whatever it was tied to Celestia, and it was tied directly to what happened to Celestia all those years ago. Twilight needed answers. This darkness that was clouding her head, clouding her entire life now, she needed to clear it. She couldn't do that unless Celestia was there to answer her. She needed to know the truth, to know why Celestia had done all this, what it had meant, and why it was necessary. Celestia wasn't a tyrant. She was a beautiful and kind. She was a loving and sincere. She was the picture of perfection in Twilight's mind. Never in her life would she have thought of Celestia as a monster, as something other than the benevolent and loving ruler. It just wasn't Celestia to do these horrible, horrible things. Her only conclusion and consolation was the sound of the tile hitting the ground, one of its edges splashing lightly in the leech's blood. Twilight let out another shudder to try and clear her mind, but walking slowly towards the tile on the ground. It was carved to resemble the door, the same as the others, and it too joined the tiles in her reservoir. She had all 4 pieces now. She could finally open the large doors that halted her progress. Something deep inside of her, something primal, told her that waiting behind the doors was Celestia herself. The thought brought both comfort and fear to the unicorn. Was she ready to face Celestia now? Could she do it after everything she had just seen? But then again, she didn't have much choice. She was in a dead end with only one way to go, through those giant doors, and she was going to meet Celestia, whether she was ready or not. Such was the way of this world she was within, pushing her to move when she didn't want to, forcing her to realize and see things she didn't want to, and to live with those facts. Twilight took a deep breath and let out a long sigh before walking back over to the stone door. The grinding stone echoed once more as she pushed it open and stepped back into the large circular room. The door closed behind her. Only a few small steps, and she found herself before the 2 large stone doors once again. They towered above her, and she stared at them almost in awe. The divine picture of Celestia nailed to the cross was horrifying, and yet, in Twilight's mind, it now seemed to make perfect sense. If any pony was going to be splayed to such a cross, then Celestia seemed to be that pony. Her eyes wandered to the 4 holes in the door, waiting for Twilight to place her finds into them. It would only take a moment, and she would hear the doors open, just the way the others had before her. She was moments away from the truth. Twilight froze in place, hearing the sound of hoofsteps against stone. She quickly turned around, sword at the ready. She hadn't been expecting anything out here. After all, she had come down from the hallway to get here. There hadn't been monsters in there, and the only monsters here were in the doors. No, that was wrong. This world changed around her as it pleased. It could very well put a monster down the hallway whenever it liked. But this time she was ready. She wasn't about to let herself be killed here. Not after everything she had been through. She was going to see this to an end. The hoofsteps grew louder, coming closer. She tightened her grip on the sword and took a calming breath, focusing on the sound. Step by step, louder and louder. If the monster was coming for her, it had done a terrible job of sneaking up on her. She only had to be patient. She could practically hear it in front of her now. She could count the steps before it would be visible to her. 5 steps, 4 steps, 3 steps, 2 steps, 1. The creature stepped into the light of her pendant, stepping fully into view, and for a moment, Twilight was stunned in silence. "I'm glad I made it here before you went through. I was worried I'd be too late." The familiar, cheerful pony spoke up, a serene smile on her face. Her hair had fallen straight, framing the sides of her face, but there was no mistaking her. "Pinkie Pie?" Twilight gasped, the shock still hitting her. How'd you get in here?" "I'm familiar with how this world works." Pinkie sighed, a hoof raising up to her hair. It ran through the length, gently running against the red ribbon that was tied to the end of her hair. "I've had to experience it twice before, and now for a 3rd time. I've come to realize what this world wants, and it doesn't want us to go through it together." Pinkie's eyes opened in surprise when she was suddenly hugged tight. She hadn't been expecting the hug so suddenly, but the comfort of having her friend right there in front of her soothed her worried mind. The 2 ponies quickly wrapped each other in their hooves and held tight, not wanting to let the other go. "I don't get it, Pinkie. I don't. But I'm so glad you're okay." Twilight squeezed a little harder, tears forming in the corner of her eyes. I met up with the others, but I don't know if they're okay or not. They were hurt, or possibly even killed right in front of me. and I couldn't do anything to stop it. The tears that had been threatening to burst finally began to fall, landing onto Pinky's back. I couldn't save them, Pinky. And I don't know if they're gone or not now. Twilight. Pinky spoke softly, rubbing the unicorn's back in comfort. I wish I could tell you if they're okay or not. But there's only one way to know for sure. Huh? How? Twilight pulled back a little, looking into Pinky's eyes. Pinky smiled in return, rubbing her head slowly. You had to finish this, Twilight. Through that door, you can end all of this. Return the world back to normal. You are the one who can save everyone. But how? Twilight cried out, pressing her head against Pinky's shoulder. I keep hearing those words, that I'm the only one who can save you all. But how? I couldn't save anyone. What am I supposed to do? Twilight. Pinky spoke softly, comforting her friend with a gentle hug. All you have to do is what you've been doing. Face the truth this world has shown you, and accept it as real. Twilight didn't say a word for that moment, just holding onto her pink friend. I'm scared too. Twilight quivered, not wanting to see any more of her dearest mentor as that horrible tyrant. I know, Twilight, but I assure you, the truth will not only set you free, but everyone here. And I know only you can do it. Pinky stroked Twilight's mane as she began to calm down. Twilight sniffed loudly as she pulled back a few steps, looking at Pinky confused. Why do I have to go through it, though? Alone? Why can't we do this together? Twilight, oh, how I wish we could. But you've seen it yourself, haven't you? Pinky shook her head slowly. You've seen what happens when we try to be together here. Twilight bit the bottom of her lip as she did remember. She remembered what happened each time she ran to her friends, in turn, the horrifying fates that had befallen them. When she had tried to be together with them, this world ripped them apart, and left Twilight twisted and broken inside each time. And that's why I came to see you now, Twilight. Pinky smiled. Right before you went through these doors and ended this. I've seen you around a few times, as well as a few of the other ponies, but I knew I couldn't go to see you. It'd be too painful to have us split apart. So I sent you my wishes, and waited for when I could see you. I just got lucky that now's the time. Twilight stared at Pinky, grateful but still confused. She swallowed lightly and turned around, facing the large twin doors that depicted Celestia one last time. She wiped her face with the tears and calmed her nerves. So, I have to go now, don't I? Twilight's lip quivered, as her determination to see this through to the end was returning. I'm afraid so, Twilight. Pinky shook her head slowly. As much as I would love to spend more time with you, you have to end this now. But once this is over, I'll throw you the biggest party you've ever seen. Twilight swallowed again, nodding her head before walking up to the door. 4 slots. 4 tiles, she whispered to herself. There was no marking on the door which told her which tile needed to go where, so she just hoped she was putting them anywhere would do the trick. The 4 tiles appeared around her, hovering within the grips of her magic. She put them up to the door and tried to fit them in. The 3rd tile slot entered with a click, while the others didn't. She couldn't remove the 3rd tile, and realized that she had put them in the right place they would click into place. So it was more than just guessing now. Quickly trying each of the slots until the tile fit into the door with a satisfying click, and the door let out a loud grinding sound. The room shook a little, dust falling from the edge of the door, before the split down the middle began to slowly open. The grinding noise filled the room as the doors opened slowly. Twilight stared into the empty abyss that was behind the doors, unable to see anything taking shape in there. She grit her teeth and tensed her muscles. She prayed that there wasn't a monster just lurking around the corner. The doors opened fully and came to a stop, silence hanging in the air. Her medallion wasn't making a sound, and she took that to mean that for the moment she'd be all right. All right. She finally spoke up, turning around to face Pinky one last time. I guess this is it then. Good luck, Twilight. Pinky's words were quiet, but could clearly be heard. I know you can do it. Twilight gave a slow, simple nod in return, before turning back to face the door. Letting out one last sigh, she began to walk forward, entering the dark room as the sound of grinding stone was heard behind her. She turned her head and saw Pinkie Pie one last moment, as she disappeared behind the giant stone doors. She was once again in a pitch-black abyss, lit only by the light of her pendant. Twilight walked forward, not knowing where the room was leading her, but having no choice but to keep going.